Welcome to Meadowlarkers 79. Full squad here today. Amin Elhassan live and direct from Miami. Kate Fagan. It looks like this is the home base.
Home
Looking at the
base, that's right.
background, home base.
Yep.
And I'm Howard Bryant, and we are here to talk documentaries. We're here to talk about the Apple Plus documentary, Boom Boom, the World Versus Boris Becker. We're going to do a little tennis today, which is great, and all kinds of things to talk about, but I'm sure tennis is going to be one of the last things we talk about if you watch this documentary. Things out of the way first. Honorary captains for Meadowlarkers 79. Very short list for me today. I got nothing. I got Dallas Cowboys defensive end legend Harvey Martin. I've got
He's got nothing. He's got nothing but Harvey Martin.
And start naming names.
and former Chicago White Sox and current Houston Astro, Jose Abreu. Those are my 79s.
Okay. Solid. Let's do it.
But I also throw a shout out to 1979, the great NCAA final, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michigan State, Indiana State, you know, what started it all, so they say. The modern era of basketball. We've got a documentary. We've got a Boris Becker doc. Anyone that knows Boris Becker knows 7-time Grand Slam tennis champion, may also know him for the other things, such as the prison term that he did for tax evasion and all kind of his assorted and sordid business deals. This is a very, very, very good doc directed by the legend Alex Gibney. All you have to do is just do an IMDb of him, and you're like, oh, that's his. Yeah, that's him. He's phenomenal. 4 hours. 2 parts of 2 hours, which is not really the traditional way to go about a 4-part doc. I'm sorry, a 4-hour doc. Usually it's 4 parts, 1 hour, but this is 2 big 2-hour chunks. Lots of things in here. Let's go around the room first to Kay Fagan. Discuss. Yeah. This was your idea 6 weeks ago, and yet you crammed Boris Becker in 4 hours. Yeah, so you were fresh off of the doc. What did you think?
I'm about 3 minutes removed from the final seconds of the doc. As I told Howard, like, it was my idea because I have always been like peripherally interested in Boris Becker. Like, I've always, when I see stuff about him, I'm always like, yeah, that dude, he was kind of cool because he was in the era of when my parents were watching a lot of tennis in the like early 90s to mid 90s. Like, obviously he was a big name. That is why I pitched this doc to Meadowlarkers. But no, I just finished watching it. I have like a long list here on my iPhone notes about just what came up during it. But as we tend to start, I'll just start with just general thoughts about it as a doc. Questions I had, things I was not sure if they were working for me or not. I mean, obviously, Howard, as you said, this is Alex Gibney, who's a legend in this field. I loved a lot of things about it. I mean, the access was basically, I mean, there was nobody he really didn't get except for, Pete Sampras didn't sit for it, but peripheral, whoever Boris's business dealings were with in the later part of his career, that dude didn't sit for it. But otherwise, you're really looking at pretty much everyone, including the women in his life, sat for this doc, which is the mark of a great doc. I mean, that is the number one mark. I thought the footage was incredible.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything he's talking about, the director or Boris, like, we've got footage as if we are there. There were a couple things, and Amin, I'll ask you if you enjoyed the reenactments that were very slight, but like, I don't know how many times.
I was waiting for this. Go ahead.
I don't know how many times in 4 hours I need to see the same tennis ball.
The same slow tennis ball up in the air, slowly rotating, slowly rotating tennis ball.
And then it becomes a feather, which I'm sure was metaphorical at various points. I'm not sure that I needed the tennis ball being lifted. And then the other thing was like interesting for an Alex Gibney doc in terms of his voiceovers were so random in it that I was like shaken every time. I'm like, oh wait, what? Like, it just felt like a breaking of the fourth wall that like wasn't consistent enough to work for me. And then the last thing that I would love both of your opinions on was, I thought the doc was trying too hard to have a reason, some really just beautiful thread between how Boris Becker played tennis and why this tax evasion happened to him. Like, it was like, here's a guy who always thought he could win no matter how much he was down, or it was he won too early at Wimbledon. It just felt like we were trying to make sure that his tennis career was a parallel for what we learned about him on the back end, that it could explain it. And I thought those threads were really bare.
Yeah, was it possible for him to play on the edge in tennis, and on the court that was magical, but in real life not so much? Yeah, that was.
Yeah. So, Amin, what did you think?
Well, you hit on a lot of the things that I noticed, Kate. The reenactment definitely irritated the hell out of me because they just
Which we
kept
know
going
now
back
is
to-
your staple, by the way, because
Oh.
the minute I saw the reenactment, the first one, when I saw the actor sort of go into his
He did
split
look like
step
Boris.
about to volley, I go, one, those aren't Boris Becker's legs. Nice body, but those
Yeah.
aren't your legs. And what is Amin going to say about this reenactment?
I'm glad, like when the first one came on, Howard, I was like, oh, here we go. And so in retrospect, it was a nice surprise to find out that, like, oh, they actually didn't go to that well that often in the totality of the thing. But that first one, I was like, here we go. And to be juxtaposed with incredible archival footage, including him at like 8 years old, winning something, and them asking him, who you want? I want to be like Bjorn Borg. Like that's insane.
And for Bjorn Borg to play that role, because he's pretty reclusive. I love that Borg is talking more, but go ahead.
So that was one thing. The other thing I liked the, you mentioned the voiceovers being inconsistent, and to the point where I would hear a voice and I would wait for the closed captioning to tell me, oh, this is so-and-so. You know how like sometimes people start talking before they're introduced on the screen? And then, oh no, that's the guy who made this. Okay, all right. But it wasn't consistent enough for you to really expect it. It just would pop in, I feel like, in places where I guess he felt like there wasn't enough connective tissue in the storytelling on its own. Similarly, I like the Old West kind of motif. But again, it was so few and far between. It was, oh yeah, that's right. They are trying to make this into like all the old guns that they're trying to shoot him down. Having said all that, and I don't even know if this thing did it on purpose, this documentary made me feel a lot.
Oh.
I felt so many emotions watching this, and I'm not a Boris Becker fan. I knew who he was. I knew obviously the trouble he got into recently. And I knew he was a great tennis player and a great tennis champ. I didn't know anything of his story though. So all of it, like almost all of this was brand new to me. But I felt myself having feelings watching it. And it wasn't necessarily like feelings for him or for his plight, so much as it was just this weird nostalgia that for something I don't even remember, but like something about the 90s, the late 80s and the 90s, and life as it was, and the pictures, and then finally, and I don't think I've ever felt this before, as I'm watching the documentary, Howard, you know what I thought to myself a lot? God, I wish I'd played tennis.
Yeah, interesting.
Like it made that world, even as they're talking about the struggles, and we're gonna get into all of that. All because they got great stuff from Djokovic and McEnroe and Bjorg and all these people. I walked away thinking, I wish I'd played tennis. I wish I would have known what it was like to be a pro tennis player.
I thought you were going to go in the opposite direction, because the thing that I always take from these docs is that sport kills you.
Yeah.
It's insane. It is insanely, it's intense. I want to get into three things. One, I do have a Boris Becker connection.
I figured you did.
Not a personal one, obviously, but as a fan, as a kid, I remember when he came on the scene. And the reason why I remember him coming on the scene is we all remember the guy who comes on the scene who absolutely beats the living shit out of your favorite player. And that's what he did to Ivan Lendl because we all know Lendl was my favorite player growing up as a kid. And the one thing about Lendl was that Lendl could never win Wimbledon. It's the big tournament. It's the granddaddy of the four. It's the one you got to have. It's the one he did everything in his power to win, and he could never win it. And then here comes 17-year-old Boris Becker, who just wipes the floor with him. And the fact that he had a career winning record against Becker, 11-10, just doesn't do justice to the fact that in finals, I think he was, he had a losing record. I think he was 5-7 in finals. But the really painful ones was, Becker showing up, and that nickname Boom Boom was because of the serve. He would just come in and just blast you off the court. So I remember him very, very well. And he was one of those young guns who was coming up, came up a little bit before Agassi and Sampras, but that next generation of guy. I love the archival. Whenever you're thinking about a documentary, the very first thing you're thinking about is the archival. What do they have? What are we looking at? And as much as we call these kids today narcissistic, Boris Becker was filming a lot of himself during those years. I guess he knew that at some point he was going to need all of this for posterity. But I guess what else do you do when you're on a private plane going from tournament to tournament? You just film yourself while you're talking. It seemed like he was being interviewed at every turn about his life. I thought
like Maradona. Did you ever watch the Maradona doc?
No, I haven't seen that.
It's amazing. I did not like first of all, they had tape of him like at 14 in Argentina, and then like very early on, his agent at the time was like, "Oh, this kid's gonna be great. Let's have a film crew around him at all times." And so it's all documented. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. Stylistically, because we all know my favorite genre of movie is the Western, I thought it was fantastic. It just made me laugh. I love the way, the freeze frame.
Yeah.
I just love that they did that. I also love the fact that there was that we got a Navajo Joe sighting, 1966, and Ennio Morricone, the music. I was like, oh, this is from like Once Upon a Time in the West, but that's from Navajo Joe. Kate Fagan, why do they call them spaghetti westerns?
I have no idea, Howard. I didn't even know they called them spaghetti westerns. So
because they were
Italian filmmakers.
Shoot 'em up?
Italian filmmakers, and also they were filmed in Italy. A lot of them were hybrids. They were filmed in Utah, Arizona, but also filmed in Italy. So that was fun to get some of that old music in there. And of course, Navajo Joe 1966 was Burt Reynolds playing a Native American. So you can get Burt Reynolds playing a Native American, and then if you want to go watch Orson Welles' Touch of Evil 1958, you can go watch Charlton Heston play a Mexican. So you can have all of those things up in your case if you want. And also good use of that music as well, because if anyone remembers the 1999 Alexander Payne film Election, they use that same music when Tracy Flick loses her mind when her posters get torn down and she goes on an epic rant. So I love the style. I thought, once again, when you're making a doc, if you're going to have these people sit in their fancy houses or, in front of a bookcase, how do you make this interesting? And I thought Alex Gibney did a terrific job making it, to give it some sort of style. I thought that was very, very cool. Once again, the access was amazing. But then there's Becker himself. You've got a long list, Kate, of notes that you made.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's go down that list a little bit when you're looking at Boris Becker in this doc.
All right. Here are three of them in a row. One basically just says, I was very surprised by how charismatic Boris Becker is in general, especially young Boris Becker. Like, I get it. Like, I get why he was Michael Jordan in Germany. I get why he was in all those commercials. Like, there's something very magnetic about Boris Becker that I was completely unaware of.
Him driving a taxi in New York City?
All of it. Up until the later sittings that Boris Becker did, the ones that are 3 years apart, I was like, Boris Becker, I totally get the superstardom. Okay, I don't know if this is a popular opinion among the three of us, but I really could have done with less tennis in this doc. Like, I didn't need... Okay, here was one final among the 20 he played, and you're going to give me like 7 minutes of back and forth going over points. Like, I honestly, there were times I fast forwarded.
You look at the Masters when they showed like the 34-shot rally on match point?
I just didn't need all the. I think no one needs to edit Alex Gibney. I get that he can put out whatever doc he wants. This doc did not need to be 4 hours. I don't know how we feel about that. You can respond later to that, Howard, if you enjoyed the footage was amazing that they were able to clear, but like I didn't need all of it. Okay, the last thing in this little trio of 3 notes, I want to, because this goes to the question of when you make a doc, how you pitch it to your principal character, what their expectations are about what you're making, and then what you actually make. Because there's a moment in the doc where Boris Becker's first wife is sitting for the doc,
Barbara.
and Barbara, you're always good with names, Howard. Barbara, and they're talking about how the fact that the crew is next going to interview Nick Ballatari.
Nick Ballatari, which is great. I love Nick. Oh, by the way, Nick Ballatari, who recently passed away. Oh. Love Nick. Go ahead.
Yeah. A famous tennis coach. And Barbara's clearly like, I love Nick. I want to send him a message. So she records a voice memo. And then they let Nick listen to the voice memo. And within the voice memo, she's basically telling him what the project is. And she calls it, they're doing Boris's like life story. And I wouldn't say that's solely what this is. Like, obviously I could see how they could pitch it to Boris Becker of like, we're going to tell your story from A to Z, but Alex Gibney does a lot of different things in it. I don't think if I wanted my life story told, I'd also want voiceovers questioning my own truth or like ability to actually reconstruct my own reality. And so I didn't know if you all caught that. And if you thought, if you were Boris Becker watching this doc back, are you satisfied at having turned over all of your footage, tell your life story, and this is the output?
I thought it was incredibly honest, and that's what made it an excellent documentary, is that it's not a puff piece. It's not, what was the last doc that we reviewed? It was just like, and then miraculously they did this. And
Reggie Jackson, was it Reggie?
It was Reggie, yeah, I think it was Reggie. I like I said, like this thing moved me in a way, and it sold these characters and the idea that none of them were heroes or villains or even enemies, right? When he's talking about
almost with Agassi,
right? Like almost
blowing kisses to my wife in the stands during the semifinal at Wimbledon.
But then they bring it back with the how did you
then they hang out.
Yeah, they hang out. And he says, how did you always return all my serves? And he's like, your tongue.
You get a giveaway.
That or McEnroe saying, hey Boris, win something first, then you can start complaining. Until then, cut that stuff out. Because he was whining, I guess, during the match, and then it's a little did I know, a few months later he'd be winning the Queens and winning at Wimbledon, right? And it's like, so all of these, and even as McEnroe in present day, he still speaks part in awe and reverence and respect and true love and admiration for Boris as a person and as a tennis player. And part of it is this guy's full of shit. Like the fact that, or Michael, was it
Michael Stich?
Michael Stich. Like they all, none of it is like, yeah, Boris, the greatest guy ever. It's yeah, Boris is great. Also, that's the coughing thing. We're like, oh, I knew I could get in his head. And I like, so I get what you're asking, Kate. If I'm Boris Becker and I turn all this stuff over and I'm seeing this, Last Dance and all these other documentaries, and Boris, we're giving you your own 4-hour doc. You're like, all right, let's invite everybody. Come on, check this out, guys. My Last Dance. And then you watch it and it's like, this doesn't really paint me in an overtly positive light, but I do think it captured him in an accurate light. And ultimately, this is what's going to make this documentary, at least to me, one that I'm always going to remember as really well done and true to the subject.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what could he have expected? I mean, he's sitting there about to be like sentenced to prison. He couldn't have assumed it was like.
And you're also being interviewed by the guy who did Enron, the smartest guys in the room. Right? He's really not that dude if you're expecting hagiography. Right? I don't think you go to Alex Gibney if that's what you're looking for. And I think that that's a really great point. I mean, I was going to make that earlier when we first started, which was that one of the things that we talk about on this show quite often is the idea that they're not documentaries anyway. They're showcases. They are the principal wants to tell their story about their life, and they're going to control who the access is going to be. They're going to control who gets to speak and how they get to speak. You know, like the Shaquille O'Neal doc was, you know, was insane. It was silly because it was essentially, I don't want to be questioned. I've got 4 hours and I don't want to be questioned. The Reggie Jackson documentary had no journalism in it, and it was Reggie out there doing the interviews, Reggie talking about Reggie, talking to people that he wanted to talk about Reggie. And so this was not that. This was actually a piece of journalism. And I think that Boris Becker deserves a lot of credit for that, for allowing that to happen. Because, you know, the tennis fraternity is so personal, because these guys literally travel around the world together. And the richer guys, a lot of the richer guys end up giving rides to the other players. It's like, oh, so we're playing. I mean, because the way the schedule goes, you know, you start out in Australia, and then after Australia, there's a couple of weeks in Europe. You know, they play Rotterdam, and then you come to the United States. Then you come do the Sunshine Double, and when you're out here, you also maybe do Acapulco or whatever. You do a Mexican tournament as well. And so if I'm ranked 150, I'm asking Boris Becker, hey, can I hitch a ride to the United States? And so these guys spend a lot of
on your personal plane.
On your personal plane, exactly. Andy Murray is giving rides to guys all around the world. Can I get a ride to, you know, from here? Oh, are you playing Dubai? Great, I'm playing Dubai, but I just got knocked out. And they have to pay for their own travel. There's no charter. How am I going to get there? Can I hitch a ride with you? So a lot of these players do spend a lot of individual time together off the court, and also because they are the best players in the world, the only players in the world they can practice with are other great players. Nobody else is good enough to give them the reps they need. So they also practice together. So, you know, you'll have a tournament with the top guys don't do that with each other anymore, but they used to, where you would practice, you know, you'll practice with a lesser player. You know, you may play that player in that same tournament, and you guys were practicing together a week earlier or a couple of hours earlier. So
Howard, I have a question for you, because we've talked about this. We've done several tennis pieces for this podcast. And, you know, obviously Boris Becker's, you know, resume is incredible. He was under 14 champ at 12. He was playing versus men at 14. He went pro at 16. He won Wimbledon at 17, won Wimbledon twice before 19. And tennis tends to have these young stars, albeit not quite as young as Boris, but late teens, early 20s. And I've always wondered, why is that? Wouldn't a more physically mature, but also a more mentally mature player be more dominant over hormonal teenagers who still haven't grown into their bodies?
Yeah. Well, it's changing now. This is why the rise of Carlos Alcaraz is so interesting, because today's game is so much more physical. Today's game is not serve and volley quick points. If you go watch those games, you notice that they do something back then that they don't do very much of today, which is the minute you serve, you immediately charge the net. Those points are over really quick. You know, it's bang, bang, bang. So you get to use a lot more reflexes. You're not thinking nearly as much as you do today, where now it's 20-shot rally, 30-shot rally, physical rally, 5-hour match, that type of stuff. And that requires maturity. So you don't see that. You don't see those phenoms today. Like the only two teenagers who have won majors, Alcaraz and Nadal. They're the last two. And you got to go back to 2005 for Nadal to do it. Whereas before, you know, you had, you know, the Agassi's and the younger players have more success faster. So back then it was possible. Today, much, much, much less possible. On the women's side, a little bit more possible, much more possible, because they play 2 out of 3. So they're not playing 5-hour matches. And also because the women's game is so much more return dominant. You don't have somebody just show up banging 135-mile-an-hour serves and just blowing you off the court. That game is a much more balanced serve and return type game. But if you're one of those kids like Becker who showed up, and you look at him, look at the footage of him, he didn't have a 17-year-old's body. Yeah. You know, he was a big guy, 6'4", you know, even at 17, big, you know, tree trunk legs, and he brought it. He was bringing, and also that he won on grass, fastest surface as well. So all this sort of, you notice that he didn't win the French Open. So there's the surface as well that also benefits the power game.
So, okay, let's keep it on Ask Howard, because there's a tennis question I realized in watching this doc that I've wanted a better answer to. So there's this little part in the doc where we're seeing at the time a young Bud Collins, I believe, says basically, quote, "There's no way a tennis player can keep a grasp on reality."
Oof.
And then it immediately goes to Boris right after winning some of his first majors. His manager encourages him to post up in Monaco, which I know is a thing, and I know it's a tax situation, why we have so many players in Monaco. But why is it predominantly, or do I think it's predominantly tennis? If it is this tax haven, are we also seeing golfers do that? Like, what is the tennis connection specifically with the tax situation in Monaco? Double barrel question here, Howard. And then, like, when Bud Collins says that, is it because Bud Collins is legendary tennis and you could replace any sport, right? It's hard. Because it's hard to keep your grasp on reality if you're a star player, probably in any sport. Or do you think there's something particular about tennis? Why?
No, this game's a meat grinder. Becker says it himself in the second episode where he says, I'm young at 29, but I've been doing this for a really long time. I mean, you're talking that these guys, people forget that Serena Williams turned pro when she was 14 years old. So they've got no teammates. They've got no schooling, no formal schooling. You've got more players now going to college, which is why people sort of in the game recommend college. So you're in a team environment, you're around other people. But most of these kids are prodigies who have one coach, who get taken away from reality. They get pulled out of school and they play tennis 8 hours a day. And that's their life as teenagers. And that's why, they are not that different from the child star, the child movie star who ends up in drug rehab, the Jennifer Capriati's. There's so many of them because they immediately are thrust into an adult world when they're, prepubescent, right? They have been doing this at this stage. It's really not that different from, some of the gymnastic stuff where you get these young girls playing at an elite world-class level at a super young age. But unlike gymnastics, this is a year-round sport where it's high profile, lots of money, and you've got all of these adult handlers, and you absolutely will lose yourself. The second question is that, Monaco, Dubai, Switzerland, it's where all the players live. Especially virtually every French tennis player lives in Switzerland. That's a tax issue. The Dubai issue, I think a lot of the players do it because it's the best combination of weather, where you can play year round, even though it does get super hot there, and also based on where you have to be. Tennis has now moved into a European sport. A lot of the players used to live in Miami because when tennis was more American-centric, Maria Sharapova lived in Miami. Becker was in Miami. A lot of players were in Miami. Azarenka was down there for a while, and then Arizona. But now, because tennis is such a European game, Dubai is the hot spot. You can get closer to Australia. You can play the European tournaments. You can play, and then the United States is the longest trip of the year you're taking.
Okay, and when it comes to Monaco, is it just why is tennis's relationship to Monaco?
I think the tennis relationship with Monaco also is because that's one of the European money spots. Right. With Rolex and all of the other stuff over there. I mean, that is where all of the sponsors, it's the money town in the, Monte Carlo, Rolex, Masters. It's just one of those places where it sort of became the C and B scene place where the tennis players would like hole up. Not that different. What's that?
I'm not mistaken. Formula One drivers.
Yeah, and exactly. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening there,
players,
right? Exactly. It's the glamour spot. And it just sort of became that. But in terms of, I think Djokovic lives in Dubai, Federer's in Dubai. And so it has shifted generationally from whatever the next spot is. But I know that the French players, it's all Switzerland. They're all over there now just to, it's like moving to Arizona or Texas to hide your money, to protect your money.
Yeah.
One thing too about this, I was going to say, Kate, that I don't know if it's on your list or not, but One of the things I thought the doc did a really good job of, and I think that's just also the subject. It's Becker, because he's good at that. Wacky character, doesn't necessarily realize sometimes how revealing he is being just when he's talking.
Yeah.
And that was his personal life. I was fascinated by how quickly he was like, I don't want to play tennis 3 hours a day and then go to sleep and keep playing tennis. He was making it very, very clear he was susceptible to the life. And
yeah, I mean, very
He said-
quickly.
go
Sorry,
ahead.
me. Go ahead. I was gonna say, like, the one, like, I can see Alex Gibney being like, how are we going to have B-roll for this liaison in the back of Nobu? Oh, let's have like a minute or two of raw fish being rolled and
rolled
made.
up in this, exactly. And let's also just ask Boris and have Boris say it was not in the cupboard because the cupboard was too small. There's no possible way you could do it in the cupboard.
As if there were people who had tried to have sex in the Nobu cupboard, and that is
You
is that a
couldn't
thing I
have
should
any.
know?
You could not. It's the room itself was too small to have physical contact. It wasn't there. And then they show the headline. Oh, it was in the broom closet. Of course, it wasn't in
Got
the
it.
cupboard. It was Boris Becker in the broom closet with the candlestick.
Yeah, I was floored because at first they made it seem like he didn't want to get into it, and then he got into it very detailed and very
Yes.
freely, and I was like,
No,
what's
no.
going on here? But that's not the wild part. The wild part is this happened on the night that he decided to retire from tennis.
Retire.
That's it. Tomorrow I'll be, stay at home dad. But tonight is my last night. Let's hang out with the boys.
I'm leaving Las
by
Vegas tonight.
By the way, my dad just died. And my mom is here still dressed in black because she's still in mourning. And he's like, come on, Mom, it's just me and the boys. I'm like, how insane and bizarre of a night this is. And at no point does he tell it like, I was under a lot of stress.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, well, I told her, I was like, tomorrow. She didn't want to wait till tomorrow. I don't know why you don't. I said, Mom, come on, let me just get one night for the boys. He's telling it, still feeling that emotion of, well, I do believe he regrets the tryst or whatever that led to a love child and further complicated his life down the line.
Which, by the way, I mean, also was highlighted by the tabloid they shot, the most expensive 5 seconds of my life.
Yeah, I was like, doesn't Boris want it? Like, I was like, that is a rough headline for him. In a lot of ways.
There were a lot of rough headlines in this documentary. Bonked is one.
Bonked.
Nazis want to kill me and my wife because we're in an interracial coupling. Like there was the tabloids. There's this one quote. I don't want to jump around too much, but because we mentioned the tabloids, he said 3 topics sell papers in Germany: Adolf Hitler, the unification of Germany, Boris Becker. And fuck, man, that is a heavy.
That's a list that is very difficult to get on,
dude. Think about that shit, man. Like, I don't know if there's an equivalent for us here in America, where if we could say there's 3 things that's going to lead the news everywhere, and then what? So once you say, even if you come down to that list, who can?
Yeah, who's even on it?
No, who can?
Yeah, and it rotates.
Let's assume you're on that list, and let's just assume you have it rotated. What is that like? To have literally the unwanted attention of a nation.
And one of the things about that is, I mean, that I found fascinating was the idea too, is we look at tennis like it's the 9th, 10th, 11th sport in our culture. It's like you can't be that important because you play tennis. How are you as a tennis player at that level? And he's Germany's first champion and a really first great super champion. What's that?
Was it big before him? Was tennis a big sport?
Tennis was it was a good sport before him, but he was the first champion. He was the first, and they're good players. I mean, there are other good players, but he was the first guy where it was like, oh, but it's also happening. Let's not forget, it's also happening at the same time. There's another German player who's way better than him, Steffi Graf.
10 miles away.
She's got 22 majors.
Dude,
and so you've got this. Exactly,
Yeah.
but you've got this boom suddenly of tennis. It's like we're on the map. We've got the best male player and the best female player.
He said she grew up 10 miles apart from him, and it reminded me of when I watched the documentary about Motown, Hitsville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they talk about like Smokey Robinson, Aretha
Yep.
Franklin, and Stevie Wonder all grew up like 3 blocks away from each other.
Well, that's like the Ricky Henderson book in West Oakland. You know, you got West Oakland, you got Frank Robinson, the Pointer Sisters, Paul Silas, Kurt Flood, and Bill Russell all living within 8 blocks of each other.
Yeah. All right. Quick little detour, if I may, because I need more insight here, Howard, from you on this. One thing it's on my list as well is, can we just take a couple minutes to I don't know what it is. Maybe you can explain to me why and how John McEnroe, now when you look at the totality of the decisions he's made post-playing career, seems to have ended up in this place where he's made a lot of great career decisions.
Yeah.
And I think of him now when I see him, I'm like, man, there's a lot of players who could have had the career he had who would have been irrelevant for the 20, 30 years post-playing career. I mean, this is a guy whose voice, I mean, you probably don't watch the show, but he is the voice of Never Have I Ever, a great show by Mindy Kaling. And I just I almost equate him until recently when Bill Murray had that issue, whatever it was. I don't think we've gotten the full scoop of the Hollywood movie he was making, where you look at Bill Murray and you're like, damn, he's just somehow made every right movie at the right time. And John McEnroe seems to have had, now when you look at it, a career like that. Is there something? Well, what do you agree with that, Howard?
I do, and I think I talked to Mac about it at the U.S. Open not a couple years. I can't remember if it's before times or after times. It obviously has to be the after time because Never Have I Ever is pandemic, so it had to be after. So John, how did you get into voice? It was a lark. He said somebody came over to me and said, "Hey, you've got the voice for this. Why don't you try it?" It was just out of the blue. When you're John McEnroe, opportunities sort of come your way. And I think it's an example of there are certain people who are in our culture who were just really super big, right? Yeah. And to remember the McEnroe at that time, I mean, he was the tennis face of a generation. And not just that, but also the face of the brat, of the temper tantrum, of all of those things. And he's parlayed that and also into this sort of elder statesman piece of it as well, because all the next generations wanted him to coach them. I thought it was fascinating the way McEnroe talked about Becker wanting him to coach him and then not answering the phone and changing his mind and being so completely unreliable. And it's there are these different degrees of McEnroe everywhere you look. And I actually love it because I think he's really helped. And obviously being a broadcaster, to answer your question, I think the broadcasting piece is an enormous piece. You stay relevant, you become intergenerational, you become part of the sport. People don't forget you because they hear your voice all the time. And I think that is a huge piece of it. And I think the other piece of it that makes McEnroe so sort of interesting as well is that he's the last great charismatic American champion that we've had. Agassi is sort of not really a recluse, but he didn't do a lot of stuff. Sampras was never that interesting, and he doesn't do a lot of stuff. So the last time you really want to go back on the men's side and you think about, hey, who's the voice of this game? It's John McEnroe. Yeah. And Chrissy, of course, on the broadcast, but she's way more professional, whereas McEnroe is way more, pop culture.
And I think in addition to the tie between them about Boris calling McEnroe to coach him fleetingly for what's a phone call and a half, is the question of McEnroe somehow, maybe through his own ingenuity or discernment, making the right post-retirement choices. And then Becker, obviously, it seems like at every turn he is making all of the wrong choices. And even though they go through some of his post-retirement decisions and investment, whether it was poker, which I'm like, doesn't seem like a terrible one when you look at poker.
But and at then, the time.
Yes. And then the organic frozen foods. I'm like, not terrible, honestly. There were certain moments with Becker where I was like, I don't know if some of the choices we could probably blame him, but some of the decisions that led to choices he had to make, I was like, damn, this guy got unlucky with some of his post-retirement endorsement opportunities.
Yeah, I got the impression too when it came to the way that was framed. Some of it he was just ahead of his time because nobody blinks an eye now at gambling. But back then, if you're going to make your face gambling in sports, people don't love that, especially with the match fixing history that tennis has. So he was a little ahead of his time there. But the thing about that period that I thought was really sort of compelling was it just shows you, and he said it himself, how lost you are at how young you are. I've got my whole life ahead of me. I'm 28, 29 years old. What am I going to do? I mean, can you imagine having your identity be complete at 29?
Right.
I mean, and I love, I mean, to jump on this after I'm done with this, because I want your thoughts on it, is the fact that they make the argument that he's haunted by Borg, who quit at 25. And when you were talking about this, Amin, about how nobody really looks good in this doc, Borg looks terrible in some areas because they talk about him sort of flailing and his personal life being all public and in the street and everything else. And the regret that Borg had, and the regret that Borg has, is also the regret that McEnroe has, because McEnroe in a lot of ways felt cheated when Borg quit because that was his great rival. Where are you going? And then McEnroe's career didn't really take off as it should have because he didn't have that great rival to fight with anymore, the way that Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic play forever and kept raising the bar for each other. I thought it was really interesting looking at the way they talked about the post-playing life for these guys.
It's funny to think about. It's so much easier to compete against someone else than it is to compete against yourself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of something that they all seem to go through. Again, Borg walked away 25 and he said, I don't want to do this anymore. And for Becker to say, that's how I want to go out. For him to be so moved by that, to say, oh, that's how I want to retire. And he goes and he plays in the Wimbledon final and realizes, if I win, I told myself beforehand, if I win, I'm walking away. And then midway through, basically saying, I don't want to walk away yet.
I'm not really done yet.
He's not.
Well, it's one of the things that, Dave Stewart, the great Oakland A's pitcher, used to say, if you're thinking about retiring before you've actually retired, you're fucked.
You're already done. You're already retired.
And of course, Pete Sampras wiped the floor with him, right? I mean, you can't think like that. You're either in it or you're not in it. And especially in a sport like that, where it's just requiring, it's such a mental sort of meat grinder.
Speaking of mental meat grinders, there was this quote right here that I really like. And it could read very egotistical. And at the same time, I thought it was just incredibly honest and self-aware. He said, where do I get the strength to keep my head and stay cool and still make the point? That's often a mystery to me too. And then I come to the conclusion that somehow I can do it a bit better than others. And I sat there and I listened to him say it, and I was like, oh shit, man. Like, again, I having not really watched him in his prime like that at all, I get it though. And it makes sense.
When he says, and he would say later in his career, fifth set's all about heart. I really enjoyed when he talked about how when I was younger, I knew I could beat you with my power. But as my career went on, I had to beat you with my mind. And when you watch players fall apart, it's the thing that we always talk about on our side of the world, which is covering. How does momentum take you? How can you have this? I got it. I'm here. I'm up 6-1, 4-1, and then the whole thing comes crashing down. This is the battle, right? This is the entire mental game.
I can't remember which player said, like, I think it was Michael.
It was Steech who said it.
Steech, right? Where he's saying, like, I'm looking, when he's cursing, when he's like lifts my spirits, right? Because I know he's breaking, right? And this whole kind of, I'll be honest, I don't think I realized how much mind games went into tennis. I thought they were just going out there and they're playing. And meanwhile, you got McEnroe over here saying he's coughing. Yeah. And so I started coughing too every time he would cough. And we get this great video of Boris Becker coughing, and then McEnroe. Well,
because you're trying to take each other out of your game, and it's such bullshit.
But the best part of it was it was almost like out of a movie where the crowd at first laughs, like this is a very funny thing. And then as they keep doing it, the crowds, you could hear them get uncomfortable. Like, oh shit, this isn't like a
No.
friendly jocular thing. This guy wants to like tear his head off.
Well,
Yeah.
and you watch tennis matches, one of the things, because there are no timeouts. Like, what is a timeout other than a mental health break, right? And in these sports, you can't do that. So you have to create them. So, there's like the great battle between Yankovic and Serena, which is hilarious because the rules of the sport say that you have to play at the server's pace, but she's Serena Williams. So you play at Serena Williams's pace. So Serena would keep raising her racket, which means I'm not ready yet. And Yankovic, Yelena played at a really fast pace. So Yelena finally looks at the chair ump and says, "Can I serve the ball?" And then Serena yells, because you're not supposed to talk to each other. That doesn't happen. And so Serena goes, "Yeah, when I'm ready." And then Yankovic goes, "When are you going to be ready?" And then Serena goes, "When I'm ready." And the crowd is like, are they going to, like, what's happening here? Right. And so tennis is that sport where, because you don't have all those other built-ins, like in basketball or football, you just start trash talking or you start fighting or whatever you do, like to release that tension. Tennis is supposed to be this genteel sport where you're not really supposed to interact with each other, but you're constantly interacting with each other because that's the only other person you can interact with. You can't talk to your coach, and you have no teammates, and you have to find these other ways to also sort of change the momentum when you're getting your ass kicked too. How do I shift this thing around? I'm going to blow kisses at Brooke Shields' wife when I'm losing. Asshole. Oh my God.
I think one thing that this doc had me thinking was that Boris Becker at one point I didn't write it down, but he has a quote about spectators in tennis, like something just about how you can either use them or how they are they're either with you or against you, which it wasn't that simple because obviously we all understand how fans work. But I started to think through how like the only fans I've really experienced are ones that are there for a city, for a specific team. And you generally get a sense of like, going into it, and not much is going to change when Boston Sixers, like, who's rooting for who. Whereas like in a tennis match, you could actually see how one player could start to work with the fan base if they see that their opponent is doing. And I just am like, wow, that is.
And in tennis, you're supposed to, Kate. In tennis, the fan is supposed to be neutral. So the tennis fan is like, you can't tell me who I have to root for and who on. But if you go to a major, the expectation is you're there to watch the tennis. You're not there to watch neutral. One or the other.
Right.
So when the crowd starts rooting for one of the players, the other player's like, hey, this isn't Davis Cup. This isn't international match. Right.
And they got to do it, and they
player
have to
gets
do
totally
it
taken out of their game.
And it seems like the fans have to do it in like different ways.
Yes.
Right. Like it just seems like it's like a release of energy after a point that you understand is for you, or murmuring at certain points. It's a language that I'm not fluent in.
Unless you're Federer, then every match is a home game. And
is
then,
that right?
Oh yeah, when it's Roger, it's always a home game. Everyone's always rooting for him.
That's
boring. And so you can see when it happens to these other players, they know the crowd is going against them. And then they also, when one player is maybe too far ahead, the fan also wants more tennis. They don't want this match to be over yet. So then they start rooting for the other player to say, come on, give us a longer match. So many more things to get into that we didn't get into. We didn't even really talk about all the the interracial relationship of Boris Becker and his wife Barbara, which I thought was
and even the finances. We didn't get much into athletes and finances and all of that.
Maybe we can combine all this into a future. We'll pick up the scraps and we'll make a gumbo out of it. We'll make a soup out of it. Right. But our time is up. I mean, final thoughts on Boom Boom, the World versus Boris Becker.
Again, it made me want to be a tennis player, and not even a tennis star. I wanted to be like 112th on the tour,
and just in the world.
Just experience that life of going and competing and the mental challenges. As much as everyone kind of really complained about it and how stressful it is, it made it so incredibly alluring to me.
Yeah.
Kate Fagan.
This is one of, I can't remember another doc where I think we all would give it like a double thumbs up. I mean, we have done that before, but it's been a while. I think there are some parts you can maybe fast forward through if you're not so thrilled with watching 7 straight minutes of some match from 1991, but otherwise, I thought it was great.
Yeah. I had no problem with the points. I like watching points. And I like them talking about their points, but I can see your point there. And yes, it even made me laugh when I was like, another slow motion tennis ball going in the air, about to make contact with the strings. And here we go. But other than that, I mean, I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was great. Alex Gibney strikes again. The documentary is Boom Boom, The World versus Boris Becker. It is playing on Apple Plus. Check it out. And for us, that's it. We'll see you next week on Meadowlarkers number 80.